15 minutes to do the Noble Truth with you. Can I request Sasma Kumara to lead you in the chanting on the Four Noble Truths?
Punachaparang bhikkhave bhikkhu Dhammesu dhammanupassi viharati Chatusu arya satchesu Katanchapana bhikkhave Bhikkhu dhammesu dhammanupassi viharati Chatusu arya satchesu Ita bhikkhave bhikkhu Idang dukkhanti Yatha bhutang pajanati Ayang dukkha samudayoti Yatha bhutang pajanati Ayang dukkha nirodhoti Yatha bhutang pajanati Ayang dukkha nirodhagamini patipadati Yatha bhutang pajanati Iti acchattang va dhammesu dhammanupassi viharati Vaitya va dhammesu dhammanupassi viharati Acchatta bahitta va dhammesu dhammanupassi viharati Samudaya dhammanupassi va Dhammesu viharati Vaya dhammanupassi va Dhammesu viharati Samudaya vaya dhammanupassi va Dhammesu viharati Atti dhammadi va Panassa Satipaṭṭhāna hoti Yavadeva jnanamattaya Patissati mattaya Anissito ca viharati Naca kinci loke upadiyati Evam bhikkho bhikkave Bhikkhu dhammesu dhammanupassi viharati Chatusu arya satchesu Sacca pabbang nittitang Dhammanupassana nittita.
Okay, now I'm going to do the Four Noble Truths. How to see the Four Noble Truths as they have occurred. This is according to the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, Samyutta Nikaya 56.11. And there it talks about 3 steps. The first is to identify each truth, suffering, the origin of suffering, the cessation of suffering, a way leading to the cessation of suffering. And then the second step is to understand the task of each truth, which is suffering is to be fully known, not to be pushed away, not to be avoided. The origin of suffering is to be abandoned. The cessation of suffering is to be realized. The way leading to the cessation of suffering is to be developed. And the third step is to acknowledge completion. When you have completed, it may not be too relevant to you right now. Okay, suffering has been fully known, origin of suffering has been abandoned, cessation of suffering has been realized, the way leading to the cessation of suffering has been developed. Maybe it can apply to you on a provisionary and temporary way. When a certain type of suffering has been abandoned because you understand its cause. Yeah, you can say that you can acknowledge its completion. Now, what is suffering? Suffering is supposed to be fully known, and the Buddha defines suffering in both conceptual terms as well as in terms of ultimate reality. Birth, aging, illness, death, very obvious. Association with the unbeloved, separation from the loved, not to obtain what one wishes for. These are all very, very obvious forms of suffering. You don't need a Sammasambuddha to tell you that. A child will tell you that. What you need a Sammasambuddha to tell you is the last one. In brief, the 5 aggregate subject to clinging suffering. And the origin of suffering is, of course, craving. And it brings about renewal of being, accompanied by delight and lust, and delights in this and that. It is craving for sensual pleasures. That's very obvious. Craving for being. Craving for being could cover a very wide range. Craving to be a good monk. Craving to be a good teacher. Right? Craving to be a good yogi. Craving to be a good mother, a good parent, a good student, a good employer, and so forth. These are all various forms of craving. And that's what turns the world around. Without craving, the world won't turn. It will be still. And so, craving for non-being is when people get so fed up, with the suffering that they crave for extinction. And they think that by taking their life, they will end suffering. That's also wrong, because that doesn't really end. So there is also a craving for non-being. There are some yogis who meditate and then they keep on seeing things arising and passing away, so much suffering, and yet they cannot attain nirvana yet. And some people even contemplate, maybe I should end my life faster, so much suffering cannot end, which is also a wrong view. Alright, this is a craving for non-being. The cessation of suffering is to be realized. And this cessation of suffering is realized when that craving is abandoned. The remainderless detachment from and cessation of that very craving means the renunciation, the relinquishment, release, and letting go of craving. When that happens, then the cessation of suffering occurs. Actually, when you truly understand suffering, it means that you understand its cause as well. Right? When you understand the cause of suffering, at that moment you abandon it. And when you abandon it, you realize that there is the end of suffering. So actually, these 3 happen simultaneously. At the moment of full understanding, automatically craving is cut off, and automatically there is a cessation of suffering. But how to get there? That's the important thing. And that's where you have to develop the Noble Eightfold Path. You all are very familiar with the Noble Eightfold Path. Right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right composure, right samadhi. And in the suttas, it's very common to see the linear development of the Noble Eightfold Path. The Noble Eightfold Path is also called the way leading to the development of the establishment of mindfulness. So you cannot develop the establishment of mindfulness by itself. You have to make sure that it is supported by the other path factors. The linear development of the Noble Eightfold Path is found very often in the suttas. And here I've colored the different factors to show that they belong to 3 different categories: Sila, Samadhi, and Panya. 1, you start off with right view. Very simple. This is a linear development. From right view, we go on to right thoughts, and then right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right composure, and then leads to right knowledge and to right liberation. But I don't think it's that simple, isn't it? You have done this so many times, and I think that is something more cyclical. So probably it goes back. Whatever knowledge you gain, whatever insight you gain through the practice of meditation will feed back and update your right view. Because of that right view that has been updated through insight, that sort of increases your faith, inspires you to practice more, and that will influence the other path factors as well. But I tend to look at it in a more complex way. We start off with right view as information and intelligence. You have to listen to Dhamma talks, you have to read books, Dhamma books, and you need to have the intelligence to be able to interpret these into actual practice. And then you need effort also. You may know all this by heart, but if you don't put in the effort to practice, also no point. Another important aspect is, right, mindfulness. If you cannot remember what you have learned, how are you going to put in the effort to practice? So these three actually work together. In the Mahachattārisaka Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 117, it says that these three are the leaders these are the executives of the Noble Eightfold Path. If these three doesn't work, the others don't work. Right? They are all dependent on these three. So these three support one another and its own feedback loop. Now this will also influence your thoughts. Having right view will influence the way you think, and the way you think will influence your speech, your action, your livelihood. Right? This is also another group. Then this one will also feed back to the first one, because when you put into practice what you have learned, and you find out that it increases your welfare, your well-being, less suffering, more contentment, and then it gives you more faith, and then you put in more effort, and so forth. So this is a feedback loop that goes on and on and on. And for most people, they're just there because they haven't started to do meditation, right? And then when you start to do meditation, then you get right composure. Although it is shown here, the arrow coming from the first feedback loop, it needs to be supported by the bottom as well. The sila aspect is still very important. Then, with the composure, this will also feed back to the first feedback loop, your right view, right effort, and right mindfulness. And when all these are balanced and matured, it will lead to right view, and this right view is insight. Initially, it's just intellectual knowledge and your intelligence. Now it's actual insight, verified through your own practical experience. This insight will feed back to the first two feedback loops again, update your insight, your knowledge, just as I'm doing this workshop, every workshop, new slides, new discoveries, new improvements, fine-tuning. And if I keep on doing this workshop, I tell you, my slides will keep on increasing. But it's a wonderful process of learning. Yeah. So this will feed back until one day when it's ripe enough, then you will go to weariness. You'll be really wearied of all the five khandhas. I'll be so weary of doing workshops, I'll go back to isolation and just meditate and be detached from everything and be liberated.